am a woman.
I forgot that you're a woman. How could I? You're always yapping.
They laughed on screen. They bickered. They made us feel like we were watching a real married couple in a modest Brooklyn apartment. For decades, the Honeymooners made America laugh, cry, and see pieces of themselves in Alice and Ralph Cramden. But behind the laughter was a story not of humor, but of tension, of a woman who carried a legend on her back, and only decades later allowed the world to see the truth behind one of television's most iconic partnerships. Audrey Meadows was grace under fire, sharp-witted, elegant, and endlessly composed. But the role that defined her, Alice Cramden, was not one with a smile or a handshake. It was hard-earned. Jackie Gleason, already a giant in early television, didn't think she was right for the part. Too refined, he said, too elegant to play a working-class wife. And from his perspective, he wasn't wrong, at least not at first glance. Audrey, the daughter of a reverend and raised in China by missionary parents, carried herself with a natural poise that made her seem more suited for Broadway than Brooklyn. She had the posture of a dancer, the diction of a debutante, and a resume filled with dramatic roles. She didn't look like the weary, no-nonsense housewife Gleason envisioned, but that's exactly what made her so dangerous, in the best way possible. Audrey understood something Gleason didn't yet see, that playing real wasn't about appearance, it was about essence. And so she hatched a bold plan that would change her life and television history. She hired a photographer, dressed in a ragged old house coat, tied her hair back sloppily, scrubbed her face clean of makeup, and posed under harsh lighting in a cluttered kitchen. The photos showed not a starlet, but a tired, frustrated woman, the kind who scrubs floors by day and spars with her husband by night. She mailed the pictures anonymously to Gleason's team, with no fanfare, no name attached. When Gleason saw the photos, he was struck. "That's the girl," he exclaimed. It wasn't until later that someone revealed the truth. It was Audrey Meadows, the very woman he had already rejected. Gleason was stunned, but impressed. Her willingness to reinvent herself, not just in performance but in presentation, demonstrated a level of intelligence, humility, and instinct that made her impossible to ignore. That move alone proved she could embody Alice Cramden not by resembling her, but by understanding her. It was the beginning of one of television's most iconic pairings. But even in that victory, the tone was set. This was Gleason's world, and if Audrey wanted in, she had to outthink it, not outshine it. She would play the role of a lifetime, but she'd also have to play a very different role behind the scene, the woman who could keep the great one in balance. From that moment, the tone was set, not just for the show, but for everything that followed. Gleason ran the Honeymooners like a one-man kingdom. He wrote, directed, blocked, and decided. Nothing happened without his say-so. He refused rehearsal, believing spontaneity bred brilliance. And sometimes it did, but often it created chaos, tension, quiet dread. For Audrey Meadows, the set became a tightrope, narrow, wobbly, and always positioned dangerously high. She had to be funny, but not too funny. Strong, but never so strong as to upstage Jackie Gleason. Every scene required not only talent, but tact. She wasn't just delivering lines, she was navigating landmine. Serving the story was one thing, but serving it without threatening the ego of its star, that was an entirely different art form. And Audrey performed it with remarkable grace, day after day, year after year. To outsiders, the Honeymooners seemed like a well-oiled machine. But behind the scenes, tension simmered just beneath the surface. Jackie Gleason's moods were infamous. Some days he arrived with charm and humor. Other days he stormed in, his energy dark and volatile. One crew member later recalled, "You could feel the entire room stiffen the second Jackie walked in. You adjusted to him, or you got burned." Writers whispered in corners, terrified to suggest changes. Directors kept their feedback minimal. Everyone adapted to Jackie, but none more than Audrey. She had no choice. Jackie controlled the pace, the lines, even the camera angle. He refused rehearsal, preferring the chaos of spontaneity. Scenes were often shot in one take, meaning any stumble became permanent. And with Jackie, a stumble wasn't just a mistake, it was a risk. He could explode without warning, unleashing frustration on whoever was closest. And sometimes, that was Audrey. She was occasionally the target of icy silence or public reprimand, but she never broke, never let the audience see the cracks forming beneath her polished exterior. What few realized was that her performance as Alice was not just scripted, it was a shield. Her quick comebacks, her measured tone, her perfect timing, they weren't just acting, they were acts of survival. Close friends would later say Audrey used her performance to process real tension. The biting sarcasm? It came from real exasperation. The calm resolve? It masked very real emotional fatigue. Yet, through it all, she remained the constant, the steady, the professional. She never allowed the chaos of Jackie's world to interrupt the illusion America had come to love. Behind the cutting comebacks and well-timed jabs was a woman navigating an emotional minefield with the skill of a diplomat and the endurance of a soldier. Jackie Gleason wasn't just a co-star, he was a storm. He could be warm and magnetic in one moment, offering compliments so sincere they disarmed even the most skeptical. But just as easily, he could flip, cold, distant, dismissive, and worst of all, erratic. One day he would publicly praise Audrey's comedic brilliance, calling her the perfect balance to his chaos. The next, he would berate her in front of cast and crew, nitpicking a line delivery or accusing her of stealing a scene, only to act like nothing had happened by the following morning. There were no apology, no acknowledgement, just a reset, as if the emotional damage didn't exist. That kind of inconsistency created a unique kind of trauma, emotional whiplash that wore Audrey down, not in big dramatic moments, but in thousands of small, quiet ones. And yet, she never retaliated, never cracked, because she understood the stakes. In the 1950s, women in Hollywood didn't just have to be talented, they had to be liked. To be perceived as difficult could mean career death. And in Gleason's orbit, the margin for error was microscopic. Audrey's strength wasn't in confrontation, it was in strategy. She chose her battles carefully, often choosing not to fight at all. She knew when to let a slight pass, when to smile through gritted teeth, and when to use the very tension she was feeling to elevate her performance. Her jabs as Alice weren't just scripted, they were lived. There was truth behind the delivery, real exhaustion, real irritation, but packaged in a way that made it palatable for audience and, crucially, non-threatening to Gleason. Those closest to Audrey would later reveal that the emotional tightrope she walked on set seeped into her off-screen life. She became more guarded, more cautious, but never bitter. That was Audrey's brilliance, her ability to take all the turmoil, the volatility, and the manipulation, and somehow transform it into timeless comedy. Not because she was unaffected, but because she was unstoppable. In the 1950s, actresses who spoke out were often labeled difficult. Their careers stalled, their reputations soured. Audrey wasn't about to let that happen, so she smiled in interviews. She praised Jackie in speeches. She protected the illusion, not just for her own sake, but for the millions of Americans who adored the Honeymooners. She knew the show gave people something: laughter, relatability, a break from their own worries. She wasn't ready to take that away. But the emotional cost? That never left her. Friends and family would later recall how even decades after the show ended, Jackie Gleason's name could change Audrey's entire expression. Her face would tighten, her words slowed, the memories never quite faded. And while she never publicly lashed out or trashed his legacy, she quietly carried the bruises, emotional, invisible, but no less real. What made the Honeymooners such a phenomenon was the chemistry, raw, electric, unpredictable. It wasn't just television magic, it was emotional friction captured on camera. Audiences believed in Ralph and Alice because they felt real. Their arguments had a sting, their banter a bite, and their silences carried weight. What viewers didn't know was that the realism came not from affection, but from sustained, unspoken tension. Audrey Meadows once revealed, with remarkable candor. People think we had chemistry because we liked each other. It worked because we didn't. It's a quote that shatters the illusion and reshapes how millions of fans might see every laugh, every sigh, every pointed glance exchanged between the Cramden. Their scenes weren't affectionate improvisations between close friends. They were emotional chess matches. Jackie Gleason brought a volatile, oversized energy to the set, a bull in a china shop of egos and expectation. Audrey countered with stillness, restraint, and timing so precise, it became its own kind of weapon. She never tried to match his volume. She disarmed it. While Jackie shouted, Audrey narrowed her eyes, paused, and landed her lines like knives wrapped in velvet. Their on-screen marriage was not built on shared warmth, but on the incredible tension between control and chaos. What's remarkable is how deeply this dynamic resonated with audiences. Working-class viewers across America saw their own frustrations, power struggles, and fleeting affections reflected in Ralph and Alice. To them, the couple felt familiar, not in spite of the friction, but because of it. And perhaps that's what made the show immortal. It wasn't neat or saccharine. It was slightly messy, uneasy, alive. Yet the very fire that gave the Honeymooners its spark came at a cost. While Jackie's unpredictability burned bright, it was Audrey who quietly held the show together, absorbing his energy, shaping it, and grounding it. Her role demanded more than comedic timing. It demanded emotional fortitude. She had to balance not just her performance, but his, and no one ever questioned the toll that balancing act took on her. Not until years later, when she finally let her truth surface. In the end, it wasn't just chemistry, it was combustion, and Audrey was the one who had to make sure it didn't blow the whole thing apart. The set was not a happy place. Jackie's temper was infamous. He hated rehearsals. Scenes were often filmed in one take. Mess up a line? Too bad. No second chances. The atmosphere was laced with fear. Gleason's moods could silence an entire room. Directors were cautious. Writers were careful. And Audrey? She was impeccable. Every time. Never letting her discomfort show. But privately, the toll mounted. She confided in close friends about the unpredictability, the emotional labor, and the loneliness of pretending everything was fine. She stayed, not because she wanted to, but because she had to. Because walking away from a hit show meant walking away from everything she'd worked for. CBS executives knew her value. They told her she was the anchor that made Jackie palatable. The chemistry is lightning in a bottle, they said. And so she stayed, not because she believed in the man, but because she believed in the work. Years later, in her 70s, Audrey finally began to open up. Not with rage, not with revenge, but with clarity, honesty, grace. In interviews, letters, and memoirs, she peeled back the curtain just enough for the world to see the truth. She called Jackie a genius, but also a bully. She praised his talent, but didn't hide the damage he left behind. She talked about the rage, the silence, the emotional landmines. She described how she used acting as a shield, how her famous comebacks were born not just from script, but from real frustration, expertly disguised as humor. Her voice, so long suppressed, emerged not in a scream, but in a whisper that changed everything. And when Jackie Gleason died in 1987, Audrey went to his funeral, quietly, respectfully. No drama, no headlines, just a private farewell to a complicated man who had once dominated her professional world. Later, she told friends, "I forgave him, but I never forgot." That single sentence said it all. An entire lifetime of restraint, wrapped in 6 words. Her final conversation with Jackie was calm, kind, unexpectedly gentle. He told her he respected her, appreciated her work. And for a man who rarely expressed such sentiments, those words carried weight. It didn't erase the past, but it softened it. A good ending, Audrey called it. And maybe it was. In that moment, the tension that had defined their working lives gave way to something else. Recognition. They had shared something, however fraught. Something real. Something meaningful. Not just to them, but to millions of viewers who had grown up with their voices in their living rooms. Audrey's story is not just about one woman and one difficult co-star. It's about what happens when emotional labor goes unseen, when professionalism is mistaken for peace, when silence becomes survival. She spent years shielding Jackie's legacy, years absorbing tension so others could laugh. Audrey Meadows became more than a co-star. She became the silent steward of the Honeymooners myth, protecting it not just from critics, but from the truth. While audiences saw effortless comedy, Audrey lived through exhaustion, masked as grace. And yet, when she finally spoke her truth, decades later, in the safety of late-in-life reflection, it wasn't done with vengeance. It wasn't an expose or a takedown. It was careful, honest, and heartbreakingly human. She didn't want to destroy Jackie Gleason's reputation. She wanted to round it out, to add nuance where there had only been applause. Because brilliance, she knew too well, can be blinding. And sometimes that brilliance scorches the very people standing closest to it. Her story reminded us that legends are often built on the backs of those who suffer quietly, that behind every great one, there's someone else, usually a woman, doing the unseen labor of emotional management, holding the chaos together and making greatness possible. Audrey wasn't just the perfect TV wife. She was the uncredited stabilizer of a volatile empire. And by telling her truth, she didn't diminish Jackie's genius. She illuminated her own. She showed that true professionalism often lives in silence, that real strength lies in restraint, and that legacies are always more complex than the laughter they leave behind. Audrey Meadows will always be remembered as Alice Cramden, but she was more than Ralph's wife. She was a performer of rare strength, a woman of quiet endurance, and a voice that, when finally heard, echoed with the kind of honesty that changes how we see the past. The legacy of the Honeymooners is etched into the DNA of American television, quoted, referenced, and revered for generations. Its punchlines are timeless, its rhythm legendary. Ralph and Alice Cramden became cultural archetypes, embodying the grit, humor, and frustrations of mid-century working-class America. But thanks to Audrey, we now understand that legacy with more honesty and depth. The laughter we heard was real, but it wasn't always free. It came with a price that only those behind the scenes truly understood. Audrey Meadows gave America something it didn't even know it needed at the time. A woman on screen who could go toe-to-toe with a bombastic man and never flinch. Her performance was groundbreaking not just because it was funny, but because it was strong, measured, strategic, and full of silent power. And that strength didn't stop when the director yelled, "Cut." It carried through the long days of emotional uncertainty, the silent treatments, the backstage tension, and the unacknowledged labor of managing a storm like Jackie Gleason. Today, when we watch The Honeymooners, we laugh just as hard. But now, we can also see what lived underneath the surface. Audrey's courage, her calculation, her endurance. Sometimes, the most powerful performances aren't scripted. They're the ones given quietly, over years, with no applause. The ones that hold legacies together without ever asking for credit. Audrey's final gift to us wasn't just her work, it was her truth. And in speaking it, she didn't undo the show's greatness. She completed it.